All right, so this is going to be a breakout on full stack development workflow. So the idea is I'm going to build an app from the front to the back, show you my process for the whole thing, and we'll talk about it. Ask questions at any time, clarifications, all that good stuff. First thing, use Trello to manage work. You can really use any project management tool. There's GitHub projects, there's Trello, there's Pivotal Tracker, there's like the Rally Agile thingy. Lots of different software. The main thing is we want to be able to know what we have to do, what we're working on now, and what we are done with. So for this, I have created and populated a Trello board. And I'll kind of talk you through first the different columns that I have. So this is Scrum or Kanban style. The idea being the column on the far left is a list of all the things that I have to do. This is my backlog. The second column is anything that I'm working on right now. And the done column is anything that is done. That means it is totally complete, it is deployed, it is maybe user tested. I'm not going to add any actual like integration tests or anything like that, but done means done. It is ready for the end user to use. And so I've labeled these stories also. So the red label is a dev task, because typically when you're working on an agile project, you have user stories, which are user-focused. So I have these user stories down here. As a curious dog, I want to see a list of all dogs. As a curious dog, I want to see a single dog. These are the user-focused stories that actually have both backend and front-end development associated with each. But before we can even get to those, I have a lot of development tasks that I need to do before I get into actual feature stories. So for those, I label them as red, and they're not phrased in the same way, but essentially this is just a way for me to keep track of what I'm working on. So I have set up the client folder, and then I have a checklist of all the things I want to do, set up the server folder, all the things I want to do, migrate the database, the things that need to happen, seed the database, the things that need to happen, and then we actually get into working on actual user stories or features of the app. And for this, it describes I need a backend route. It describes what the homepage should look like and some of the functionality of it. And you'll notice that every single one of my stories, the last thing is to deploy. In the agile world, the idea is to deploy early and to deploy often. You don't want to wait until your project is totally done to figure out deployment. You want to deploy essentially immediately so you can figure out those issues early on, and then eventually you'll have a flow where you can just immediately deploy, everything's already working, and your latest features are up in the cloud. Any questions on this before I jump into it? Cool. Let's take a poll. Should I build the front end with React, Vue, or Angular? All right, raise a hand for React. Jeez. Raise a hand for Vue. Oh, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. React, raise your hand again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I guess it's the draw, so we do Angular.
I mean, I could, yeah, well, I could do Angular. You'll just see me cursing the whole time because it's not Vue. I'll do React. I want to use the front-end framework, mainly for the development flow. All right, I'll use React. Okay, so first story, what I'm going to do is move it into the doing column because this is what I'm working on right now. A lot of times teams will have what's known as a WIP limit, a work in progress limit, which means that their doing column can never have more than 3 stories or 4 stories. The main idea being, like, if a story is sitting there for a long time, they know that, like, that's something that really needs to get done so the whole team can jump on it. My work in progress is just going to be 1 story at a time because I'm a single developer. And so let's do it. If we look at our checklist, we'll kind of be working through these objectives along with the Trello board. It's kind of the same thing. But first, create separate folders. So setting up the client side. When I'm getting started with a full stack app, I create a new directory that's going to hold both my client and my server. You could create them in your workspace, but just give them a unique name so you don't confuse them with anything else. But I'm going to create a directory, call it full stack workflow. And inside of that directory, I will have a project for my client side and my server side. Each one will be a separate repo. For create React app, does it create a folder?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. So create React app. We're just going to call this Well, this is, if you guys have worked on the pairing thing, this is essentially Barkwire. Sweet. So my first task is to generate the app. I'm going to be using Bootstrap for this just to get some easy styles in there, and I'll use their adaptive and responsive design classes. Any preference on which theme I choose? Lux is cool. Minty is cool. I do like dark themes. Let's use Minty. That's nice. So if you're not familiar with Bootswatch, this is themes for Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a CSS framework. Bootswatch has created themes. All the classes are exactly the same. It just looks a little different than default Bootstrap. So we'll grab that for later use. I can grab that CSS and throw it in my app.
Now for React Bootstrap, you need the 3.3.7 version of it.
Well, I'm not going to use the actual component library. I'm just going to use the CSS.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So that created Barkwire. I'm actually going to move this into a folder called client, just to be clear here. Let's go into the client folder, open this up inside of Atom. And my next task is to add Bootstrap. For this, it's as simple as just adding the CSS to the index.html. Autumn mentioned React. Is it called React Bootstrap or React Strap?
React Bootstrap is it goes up to 3.3.7.
Okay. So that's an actual component library, which instead of using CSS classes, you'll use like navbar component, button component, all those kinds of things. I'm just going to use the classes. But if you are building like a legit app, you probably want to use something like that because it has all the JavaScript features with like modules and drop-down menus and stuff like that. Cool. So I added my styles there. That is it for that task. I added Bootstrap. Next thing is to create the layout. So for this, I'm going to kind of just rip out all the stuff that's already in my app.js. I want to get rid of that logo. I want to get rid of the existing CSS. Well, I guess we'll keep the existing CSS file, but right now there will be nothing in it. And let's delete this. Delete. Let's delete the index CSS. Don't want that. And I'm going to create my basic layout here. So on the Bootswatch docs, I want this cool little nav bar. So I'm going to grab this. And inside of here, we need a root level element, so let's just throw a div in there. I then will have, is this, yeah, so this is a nav, but I'm going to put this inside of a header. And then throw that in there, and I got to fix a bunch of stuff. So for one, I actually don't want any of this, I just want the name of the thing. This is React, so we have to use class name. And what's this complaining about? That's extra. Cool. And this will say Barkwire. What happened there? Okay. So I've got my header. I'll also have my main area. I'll give this a class of container. That's a Bootstrap thing. Basically pushes in the sides, gives it a little bit of margin. And for now, we'll just throw an h2 in here that says show dogs here. Let's see what we got. Let's start it up. npm start? Yes? Yeah. My React people are nodding. Failed to compile. Cannot resolve index.css in source. So I deleted that thing, so let's get rid of the import of it. There we go. Got a basic app, got a nav bar, the h2. My basic layout is here because when I start working on stories, the component is going to get showed right there in that main area. Okay, so back to our checklist. I created the layout. All right, let's deploy. So for the front end, when you're using React, you need to build it before you deploy. So I'm going to do npm run build. If you look in your package JSON, there is this build script. Essentially, this creates the build folder with all the files that the browser can actually understand. So that's good to go. And now if I cd into the build folder, if I just want to test to make sure this will actually work when I deploy it, you can just run light server inside of this folder because light server is essentially a static server, so it's very similar to Firebase or Surge, but running on your local machine. So if your app works and there's no errors in the console or anything, I can be pretty sure that when I actually do deploy this, it's going to work. I'm going to use a deployment tool called Now. Super simple. You just type Now, and it will deploy it. Very similar to like Surge and stuff like that. And that gives me a URL, and Now has this thing where I can give it a nice name instead of like this randomly generated thing. So I'm going to alias this to Barkwire Client. Cool. And so now, if we go there, we're deployed. I'm going to throw this in the comments, so if my product owner or someone comes along, they can check out the deployed link. But it is deployed, so that story is done. All right, moving on to the server side. Move it into the doing column, get started. First thing, generate an Express app, and I want to do this inside of a server folder. First break timer of this thing. Take a quick stretch. Close your eyes, maybe. Look away from the screen. Oh, yeah, no problem. Goodbye.
No regrets.
Cool. So right now I'm in the client folder. I want to go up one and create a server folder. And actually, one thing I didn't add is I should push this up to GitHub, right? It's deployed. I should have committed already. Let's commit the client and push it up before I do anything else. So for this, I'm going to create its own repo for the front end. So I'm doing a new repository. We'll do full stack workflow client. Create it. Grab all of this stuff, and now we'll get init. I believe it comes with a git ignore, and it ignores the build folder. When you're pushing a React app up to GitHub, you definitely want to ignore the build folder because these files change every time you build your app. So there's no point in having them on GitHub because you can just generate those files by running npm run build. So make sure build is git ignored. If I do a git status, we shouldn't see build in there because it's ignored. I can add everything and commit it. Ta-da! Initial commit. And then add my remote and push it up. Cool. And now our client is on GitHub. Good deal. Let's also add that to the other story as a comment. Save. All right, now we're working on the server. So who here has used the Express generator? Who here has not used the Express generator? Cool, I'm going to show you something great today. If you're just getting started with Express, it can be a little bit much, but if you've been working on Express apps, you should use this because it has a lot of built-in things by default that you don't have to set up from scratch. It's the boilerplate, yeah. And so to get this tool, you do npm install -g express-generator. And that installs the generator as a global command. And then once you have it, anybody need that? Generator. Greg's writing. I'm waiting.
Go for it.
Cool. Cool. So to do this, you do express. And then if you do --git, it automatically creates a git ignore. And then period means generate it inside of this folder. So I'll do that. And we get a bunch of shit. So first thing I need to do is do an npm install to get all of my dependencies. And then if I do npm start, that will load it and start it up on port 3000. And we get a basic Express app. Cool. So we generated the app. Now let's convert it to a JSON API because by default, when you generate an Express app, it includes server-side rendering. And because I'm decoupling, I have my client React app that's totally separate from my backend app. I want my server to only return JSON, so it's not going to render any views. Right now, in terms of development workflow, I actually have 2 Atom instances open. One has my client side, the other one has my server side. Depending on what app I'm working in, I might open a single instance of Atom that has all of the files in there, Having them separate prevents you from like remembering where you are and which part you're working on. It's totally up to you. I do like to do this though. Cool. So to turn this into a JSON API, first thing I need to do is remove the view engine setup. So this is using Jade by default to render views. Just gonna delete that. This is also serving up the public directory as a it's basically a static server inside of my Express app. I don't want that either because my front end is being served statically by some other server. And because I deleted those, and also I'm going to delete the routes too. Routes go away. I'm moving really fast. I have a video where I break down exactly what I do to make this happen. I'll Slack that out. It's like 6 minutes long, and I explain why I'm removing it and what gets removed and all that. So don't worry right now. Just know that I'm removing all the unnecessary stuff to get a basic Express app that only returns JSON. Cool. All that's gone. Last thing I need to do is this error handler should return JSON instead of trying to render a view. So the message is going to be error.message, and then the stack trace is going to be this. Or that. And actually, let's make this response.status code. And as I mentioned, I just moved really fast. I have a video that explains exactly what I just did here. Cool. Yeah, one thing I will do though is right here, in between my middleware and my error handlers and 404 handlers, is add just a simple get route that's going to return just like a hello world whenever we hit this API, so we don't get like a not found message or something like that. So recres, throw this in there. This will just respond with a JSON object where the message is hello from Barkwire API. And let's throw a little dog emoji in there. Boom. Cool. So this is good to go. Some things that I no longer need are path or favicon. Let's get rid of that. Let's convert all these vars to const. Let's convert these to fat arrows. Cool. Looks good to me. Let's try it out. Kill the existing server. Do an npm start. And now if we go to localhost 3000, we should just get hello from Barkwire. So basic Express app. Right now it's just returning a simple get route at the root. Later on we're going to add all the other stuff, but this is just an Express app. It's ready to go, ready to add more routes in and stuff like that. Yes, sir?
Question about the generator.
Yes.
What's the deal with the bin folder?
So this is the main reason I use the generator. So this is the actual file that, if you look at the package JSON, it runs that file. This is the actual file that starts up your app, but it does lots of things in here. For one, it has error handling, so that if you try to start up your Express app and you already had something running on the port you're trying to run on, it will show you an error that actually makes sense. If you tried to start up the app and you didn't have the right permissions, it'll show an error that makes sense. Basically, it listens for errors, and if you don't do this manually, you would never see those errors if you're just doing a basic Express app. The other thing is this debug package will also add server logs for you. And in your app.js, that gets set up here also, so every request coming into your app, you'll see those requests. Makes it a lot easier to debug, like on Heroku, because you can see when this request came in, this error happens, you know like which route to look at. Other questions about this? I promise after this I will not go this fast. Cool. Converted to JSON API. Install dependencies. I'll save that for migrating the database because we're going to need to install connects and PG and stuff like that. One thing I will do though is because this generated app came with things that I'm not using anymore, like Jade and serve favicon, I'm going to remove them. So if you do npm uninstall Jade and serve fav icon. That will remove them from your package JSON and get rid of them from your node modules. npm uninstall. Yeah. Cool. What's next on the list? Deploy. First, I am going to commit. So we'll initialize this as a Git repo. If I do a git status, we don't see node modules. That's a good sign, and it's mainly because when I generated the app, it created that git ignore for me. Just like you don't want to commit the build folder on the client, you don't want to commit node modules on the server side. So let's git init, add everything, and add our initial commit message. Let's go to GitHub and create a new repo. Full stack workflow server. And if you look at my Git repos, I have a lot of repos like this. You'll see the name of the app dash client, name of the app dash server. This is just so I know I can differentiate between the two. You could also do dash backend, something that'll make you remember like which repo is for what. Let's push that up. Actually, do I have a README? I don't have a README. Let's create a README real quick. Barkwire API. Setup. So the next developer that comes along knows what to do. npm install and usage. npm start. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and install nodemon because I will be using that later. So in this directory, I'll do an npm install of nodemon. Actually, that should have been a development dependency. It's okay though. Yes, save dev. Save dash dev. Let's do that because so npm uninstall nodemon. There might be a command to switch it to a dev dependency. We could look that up, but for now I'll just remove it. And then npm install I know it as dash save dev. Maybe dash dev will also work. But the idea of a development dependency is when you deploy this to Heroku, Heroku knows to not install the things listed under dev dependencies. So Heroku typically isn't running your tests. It doesn't need a auto reloading server. So those things, if you put them in your dev dependencies, when you deploy, Heroku won't have to install them. So now we have that as a dev dependency, and we'll add a dev script which uses nodemon. And because I use the express generator, the command is bin/dub because that file imports this express app and then adds all the error handling and everything to it. Cool. Let's add that. Sparkles. Added nodemon. In our README usage, npm start. Development is npm run dev, and that'll start up nodemon. Cool. Add everything. If you didn't realize, GitHub understands emoji codes, so all of my what is happening? Oh, I haven't added the remote. Let's add the remote. In a second, I'll show you. All of my commits have emojis next to them, which is pretty cool. Check this out. Yeah, so there is an emoji guideline. So tada is for initial commit. Sparkles is for when you add a new feature. I like to use book when I update the README. But let me show you a repo that has like a ton of these. It's cool because at a glance, you can see what each commit, like what happened in that commit. Mastery, I think, has a bunch of commits like that. Yeah, tons of stuff. So sparkles or like an add sign. Different versions, I use the bookmark because it's a new version release. If I remove anything, I'll use scissors. If I'm fixing a bug, I'll use a bug. If I'm fixing like linter errors, I'll use the cop. anything related to style, I'll do like lipstick or nails or something like that. Or the art thingy. I don't know, it's fun. You should do it too. All right, let's deploy. So Heroku create barkwire API. Is that name already taken? I think there actually is a straight up barkwire API. Barkwire API better. Cool. So I created the app. You run this command inside of your server Git repository. Because if I do a git remote, let's take a quick stretch. Cool. If I do a git remote -v, that actually adds a new remote with the name Heroku, so I can push these changes up to Heroku. So now if I do a git push Heroku master, should deploy it. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and add this to my thing as a comment, and also my server repo as a comment. It deployed. Heroku open. We're on the internet. All right. Okay, so those things are deployed. Everything's pushed up. Let's keep moving. So, done. Boom. All right, next story, migrating the database. Before I move on to the next thing, any questions or thoughts on setting up the server side? Cool. All right, migrate the database. So this is going to happen inside of the server folder. First thing we do is we need to install Connects and PG. So I'll do npm install Connects and PG. And if we look at our server folder, that will add those as dependencies. And then I need to initialize Connects, so I can do Connects init. That creates my Connects file. Let's look at my to-do. I have initted Connects. Let's now create the database. So I'm going to do create db barkwire. That's a built-in command from Postgres that just creates that database called barkwire. Now that I have that database barkwire, I can connect to it in my Connects file. So for this, I'm going to get rid of everything except for development, and then we'll kind of set it up. So the client is PG, because I am using Postgres, and that's the name of the PG package that I installed. You can also, I think, put Postgres in here, or PostgreSQL. It knows what you're talking about. The connection here is just a simple connection string. The Postgres protocol on localhost, and then my database name is barkwire. So this will connect to the development server. While I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and create my production connection. And its connection URL is process.env.databaseURL. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. And this is the environment variable that Heroku creates when you add the Postgres add-on. So it knows when we're on Heroku, connect to that database. Cool. Connects file is set up. Now let's create the ERD. So I'm going to use Lucidchart for this. I'm going to have a very simple table, so I probably could just create this without creating an ERD, but it is a good habit to get in. Come on, what's happening? An entity relationship diagram. Yes. Oh, log in with Google, please. And I don't think I can create any more documents, but we'll delete this one and start over. But this is a language for describing the tables in a database and their relationship. I wouldn't say it's a diagramming format for describing tables in a database and the relationship. This one here is a product table that I created, but let's just delete that and start over. So I'm using Lucidchart. You can use a lot of other tools, but Lucidchart specifically, if you click search and then, no, go away. If you search for entity relationship, they have built-in things for creating diagrams. You can click pin on it, and then after you've pinned it, it shows up on your left-hand side. So I'm going to use this one. And our entity is going to be dog. We have a primary key of ID that is of type serial. Serial is the Postgres auto-incrementing type. So each new row is going to get a brand new ID based on the ID of the previous row. A dog will have a name, a description, an image URL, and an image caption. So a name, this is going to be type text. A description, this is going to be type text. Up here we can give it more fields. It will have an image URL. This is also type text. What else? Image caption. And this is going to be of type text. And I realize I spelled URL with lowercase l. Cool. We need one less. Cool. This is a super basic diagram because I don't have multiple tables. Right now I'm just dealing with one table. But just to show how this thing works if you do have multiple tables, like let's say I have a user table. A user has a primary key of ID that is of type serial. A user has a name that is of type text. But then a user also has a dog ID that is of type integer. And what this says is that I think we go from, actually this is a one-to-one relationship. We can do one-to-one. So this says one user has one dog. And when I insert a user into my user table, and actually this will be a foreign key, the dog ID column will be the ID of some dog that has already been inserted into the dog table. And now this allows me to have, like, every user can own some dog from the dog table. Diagrams can get much more complex than this. I have an example of one, I believe here. Is it this one? Maybe it's... oh, DB is here. I put this one, the DB, in a separate repository. This one's super complex. So this is basically modeling initially like galvanized. So you have campuses. So this is like Platte, Golden Triangle, Seattle, Boulder. They would all exist in that table. And then you have instructors. And so instructors would have many instructors in it. But then an instructor can actually belong to multiple campuses, so that brings in this join table. So every campus that an instructor is at would have a new row in this table with the instructor ID and the campus ID. And this app is all about peer observations from one instructor to another. So an instructor can have many peer observations, and they're either going to be the observer or the observee. That has relevant info. A peer observation has associated standards with it. A peer observation standard has an actual standard ID, which is the standard itself. I could talk about this all day, but this is like the full database structure and all of the relationships, and I use this tool to build it. Cool, so that's there. For now, we just got a super basic table, and let's share this thing. So on here, you can publish it, and I'm going to publish a selection that's a PNG, decent quality. So I can just grab that, and then that gives me, I think this is it. Maybe this is the old one. That's the old one. Cool. So I have an actual image URL, and I'm going to put this in my README. So now the next developer comes along, he knows the schema of my database. So in my README over here, let's say DB schema. And now when I preview it, boom, got my schema in my README. Cool. So now that I have that schema, let's actually create a migration. So I created the ERD. Now let's run the migration. Let's open that schema up as a reference. And then in this folder, I'm going to do connects, migrate, make. Is that what it is? Yes, cool. Dog. So that creates our dog migration. Sweet. And now I want to create a migration that matches this schema. So I need to return connects.schema.create table. The table name is going to be dog. Then we get back the table. Let's make this a little smaller. Oh, that's nice. So if you do table.increments, that creates an ID column that is auto-incrementing. We'll do table.text, and this is going to be name. I'm going to say that this column is not nullable, meaning a dog must have a name. Typically in an ERD, you can also put your constraints. Those would go like next to the type. You would say like text, not null. Yeah, so we got our text. We also want our description. That also can't be null or empty. We also want our image URL. That also can't be empty. And then our image caption. By doing this, if I even attempted to insert a dog that didn't have these fields, the database throws an error. It says, this field cannot be null. You must put some value in there. Cool. That's the description. In the down, it's the opposite of the up. So the opposite of creating a table is, dropping a table. Dog. 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 Cool. Yeah, that's my schema. Questions about this? Cool, cool. Let's do it. Let's do npm, no. Connects, migrate, run?
Migrating's latest.
Latest. That did it. We can check to see if it actually worked. psql bark wire. Describe my tables. Describe the dog table. Sweet. So that worked. Now we deploy. Okay. I do not have these commands memorized. I do have a cheat sheet, though. No. Gist. Actually, if I just search for Heroku cheat. No, I'll search for it. Here it is. Okay, so first thing I need on my Heroku app is a Postgres database. So I'm going to do the Heroku add-ons create Heroku PostgreSQL. So that created it.
So are you paying for your Heroku Postgres? Because I know we have to use HabiDev.
Yes, this is just the basic free one. And yeah, it's totally free. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Cool. You'll notice also it also says created the database as database URL. So that means it created that environment variable under the hood so I can use it. And now let's make some stuff happen. So if I do, well, first I'll need to deploy so that my migrations get pushed up to Heroku, so that code is up there. So let's go ahead and add everything. Add dog table migration. I'll push it up to GitHub first. And then after we push it up to Heroku, I will be able to migrate my database on Heroku. Now I realize this is just a bunch of setup. Soon we will get to me interfacing with the front end and the back end, and you'll see kind of my flow for that. Because I have seen a lot of students where you'll like maybe build the whole back end, deploy it, and then now your front end is talking to a deployed back end. But then if you ever find any errors in your deployed back end, you got to fix it, then redeploy. I'm going to show where we work locally. When we're done, we deploy it. It's beautiful. Okay, run.
So you basically just make down that tower in an hour?
Yes, I'm going to. It's going to happen. Well, I don't have 2 tables, so no.
An hour 15.
Cool. So that says it worked, but if we run this command, that will drop me into a psql prompt on Heroku, and I can actually make sure that the tables exist. They do. And now I describe dog. It is there. Very cool. We already committed. We already pushed up. We're done. We deployed the database, basically. Done. All right, let's seed the database. First thing is to create the seed. So here we're going to do connects seed make. Okay. Oh, got to give it a name. It is good practice to give your seeds numbers because they do, when you run your seeds, it runs all of them in alphabetical order. So I'll say 01 dogs. Cool. That creates the seed file here. And now we can actually seed the table. So first thing we'll do is delete all the rows and take a break. Okay, so has anyone here used async await? A little bit? Async await. No? Okay. Okay, I'm going to use it here because it's really fun. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say await the deletion, and we'll have to throw this async keyword on there so it knows what to do. And instead of having to do .then, it can just come immediately afterwards. And then we'll say await connects dog.insert. And right there, I'm going to put my sample data, which I have right here. Boom. Okay. Actually, a good practice is like put this in its own file. I'm going to do that. So in the root of the server, I'm going to say dogs seed data.json. Well, I'll call it .js. And then this will just export that entire array of dogs. I'm going to run ESLint on this thing because what is it complaining about? Mixed tabs and spaces? What if I beautify it? Okay, now what's it complaining about? Must use single quote. ESLint, fix it. God damn. Okay. Find all my double quotes and replace them with single quotes. Oh god, not in the whole project. Okay. Okay, just in this file. Replace all. That broke some stuff. Oh, because I gotta like escape that one. Oh god. Okay, here's what we do. Yeah, so first thing, I'm going to replace all single quotes with an escaped single quote. And be it known that I blame Kyle for this because he's a double quote guy. Yeah. So replace all single quotes with an escaped single quote. Replace all. Cool. Now replace all double quotes with a single quote. Replace all. Hey. Sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, a quick note though. So notice that I didn't put this example data file inside of the seeds folder because when you run connects seed run, it tries to run every single file in there. It'll come across this and say like you're not exporting a function, like what's happening. So I'm putting it in here. I might even create a folder for it. Let's call it like data. I don't know. Throw that file in there. And then now in this seed file, I can bring it in. Go up one directory into the data file folder and grab the seed data. That exports an array, so then I could just insert that array right there. Yeah, this should do it. So this async await stuff is basically like doing .then, but it makes your code look a lot cleaner. So instead of having to say delete .then, insert dogs inside of that function, this will actually wait for that to finish, then wait for this thing to finish. All right, let's see if it works. Connects, seed, run. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So that worked. If we do a pSQL, we grab all the stuff in the dog table, it's there. Cool. So let's add, commit, push, run the seeds on Heroku.
Can you do this on Firebase too?
Do what on Firebase?
Like Like, could you use it what Firebase speed?
Not the backend. So Firebase is strictly a static file server, so they don't know how to run node code. Firebase static deployment is that way. They do have serverless functions, which I don't believe could run a full Express app. You'd have to do something special. And they do also have a database, but it's not Postgres.
If their own database, you have to use everything they have for it to work.
Yes.
So it could be kind of.
Yeah, I mean, but if you are using just their stuff, it could work. But if you're using Postgres, you're going to need something like Heroku. Okay, let's push that up to GitHub. And then we'll push this up to Heroku. And then we'll run the seeds on Heroku. So for that, we can do Heroku run connect seed run. Very nice. Looks like it ran the seeds. So if I do a Heroku PGP SQL, and then quick tip, so if I do a table dog, we should see all the data we do. But if I do /x, that turns on extended display. So instead of seeing like this weirdly formatted stuff, now when I do table dog, it's one row at a time. So it's a lot easier to read. Cool, but the data's in there.
What was it?
/x. Yeah, and you might be able to set it so that it does that all the time, but you'll, as far as I know, you pretty much have to run that command every time you get into pSQL to turn on extended mode. Cool, our data is in the cloud. We are done. So we created the seed, we inserted the sample data, we deployed. Now it's time to work on some features. Okay, so I have finished the setup process. I've got my front end, I've got my back end. We are ready to go. Any questions about what I just did there? Yes, sir.
So is this phone, I guess if I'm using the right, the agile practice of one feature at a time? Or right now you just set up the canvases in order to do the one feature?
I would say that, yeah, because because I was working separately, like set up the client, set up the server. Now when I get into here, you'll notice that the to-do list, like the checklist inside of here, includes both server and client tasks. So I'm not going to build out the full API and then build out the front end. I'm going to build the one API endpoint that my one front end feature needs, and then move on to the next story. And that's known as feature slices. Basically, the all the stuff from front to back required to make that feature work are done, and then you move on to the next story. Because after I'm done with this story, I could potentially ship this to users and they have a fairly usable product. It's not full feature, it doesn't have all the features, but it has at least one feature that they can do. So that's known as feature slicing.
When you're doing your own development, are you using Postgres?
It varies. So it really comes down to what kind of data are you trying to model and represent in your app. If your data has relationships, like if tables are related, it makes sense to use some sort of SQL database. And I do use Postgres if I'm working with SQL.
Are you using Connects if you're working with Postgres?
I am using Connects, but typically I might also use something called Objection.js. So this is, you use Connects to make your migrations and seeds and everything, but Objection is an ORM wrapper on top of Connects, and it allows you to create relationships between tables. And then instead of having to do manual joins, you can say, give me this table with all of its related data, and it just does it. Yeah. Yeah, so Objection.js is cool. There's also Bookshelf, which I really didn't like when I used it.
So
There's also,
you're using a top Connect.
yes, and it actually uses Connects under the hood, which is pretty cool. Bookshelf, I believe, I don't know if it uses Connects under the hood. It might not.
So Connects is not great. I'm not crazy for thinking Connects is not great at the joins.
I wouldn't say it's not great. It's just it's a process because it's almost equivalent to writing the raw SQL that would bring those tables together.
Yes.
And typically, when you join tables together, then you need to remove duplicate data and stuff like that. When you do a relationship query with Objection, it does all of that for you and all of the reformatting for you. Cool. There's also Sequelize, which is a pretty popular one. That said, if I'm building an app where aren't as many relationships, or I'm dealing with data where I don't exactly know the structure yet, I'll use Mongo. All right. Okay, now on to the features. Let's check our objectives. So we created our separate folders. Now we're kind of getting into feature slices. So if we look at this story, it has tasks for creating the API route, working on the front end, and basically everything here will have one feature, which is listing all of the dogs. And this is a feature slice, because when this story is done, I could deploy it to my users and they can use this one feature. They don't have to wait for the entire API to be built, because to an end user, they get no use out of an API, right? You need an actual front end for them to actually be able to use it and do something from it. Okay, first thing, I need an API route at API v1 dogs that returns all the dogs from the database. So this is going to be on my server side, and I am going to go ahead and start up my server. So if I do npm run dev, that's going to start nodemon, and localhost 3000 should bring up our hello world, and it does. Now we need to do the stuff on the back end. So typically when I'm building API routes, I will create a folder in my server called API. And essentially all of my routes are going to go inside of that folder. And then I'm going to bring those routes into this file and then mount them at a URL. So in here, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it dogs.js. And to create a router, you bring in Express. And then you do router is express.router invoked. And so a router is like think of it like a mini app. Question? Thoughts?
No, I just saw this for the first time last week. Brandon.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, and one thing I did was I updated the solutions branch of Galvanized Memory to do it this style instead of what was there before, just to show that it's possible. Because when you have lots of routes, this file can get extremely big.
Yeah.
And so what this allows you to do is all of your separate endpoints can be in a separate file, and then I'll show how we bring them in here and then put them at a URL. So router is in here, and then I'll export this router. And our dogs needs a basic get route at /. So I'm just going to create a basic one real quick. We're not going to talk to the database just yet. So when you request /dogs, I will just return an empty array. res.json empty array, because we're not talking to the database yet. Now, here's the interesting thing. So in this file, all of my URLs will not have the word dogs on them, but when I mount it, all routes will be prepended by /API/v1/dogs. So when I make a request to API v1 dogs / it's going to hit this route. And then I'll have another route for getting a single dog, and it's going to hit that route.
Is there any reason why you put V1?
Yeah, so this is API versioning. So right now, this is version 1 of my app. I'm going to build out the API. But what if I decide to change the structure of the data coming back from the API? I may not want to break existing apps, so I would leave V1 in place, create a version 2 where like the data is in a different format, and then eventually take down V1. But if I leave V1 up, because all the existing apps that depend on it would still work. It's basically API versioning. If you've ever interfaced with like the Twitter API or the GitHub API, I think GitHub API is on V3, but they technically still leave up their V2 API. The idea is when they decide they're going to change the endpoints or change the data, they just create a new version, and instead of wiping out the old one, they leave it around so existing apps don't break. It's just a good habit to get in. Right now, kind of makes no sense because I only have one version, but it's a good habit to get in. Okay, we created that router. We are exporting the router from this file, so now let's bring it in to our app file. So right here, I'm going to say dogs is require, go into the API folder and grab the dogs file. So now I have that router, and now we're going to use it at that URL. So API v1 dogs. And so what this says is any request that comes into our Express server that begins with this URL will then go into this router, and anything that matches after that will be prepended by that URL. So when I make a GET request to this, I'm actually going to be hitting this route. OK, let's see what happens. Request API v1 dogs, empty array. Cool. Now I need to get the stuff from the database. For that, I'm going to create a database connection. So I'm going to create a new folder, call it db. Inside of there, I'm just going to create a file called index.js. And this is going to bring in the connects file, connect to our database, and then export that connection so we can use it elsewhere. First thing I need is what environment am I running in? And that's going to be process.env. Quick stretch. Stand up. I'll stand up too.
Sorry.
I don't know how to do
I
that.
don't
I guess
either.
OK. So our environment is process.env.node.env or development. Because when we deploy to Heroku, this is set under the hood to be production. So when we're deployed, this value will be equal to production, but locally, because this isn't set, the value will be development. Now that I have the environment, I'm also going to bring in the config, and that is just the connects file. So go up one directory and grab the connects file. Now that I have the config, I need the environment config. And basically, if we look at our connects file, it is an object that has two properties, development and production. So essentially, I'm going to use what environment we're in to either choose this object or this object. And because we tell it the environment, when we're running locally, it's going to connect to this database. And then when we deploy, it'll connect to that database. So the environment config is going to be config at the environment property. Cool. And then I'll bring in connects. Connects. And then I'll create the connection. Connection. Not car. So the connection is going to be connects, the library, invoked with my environment config. And then this file will just export the connection so that any other route file or queries file that wants to use the connection to the database will just require this file in. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So we have our database connection. Now let's use it. I'm going to create a queries file. Queries.js. This is going to bring in the database connection, index.js. And we're just going to export an object. And this will have a getAll method that will just do db with dog. And it will return that. So that selects all the rows in the dog table. Cool. Now let's bring those queries into our route. So in here, let's say queries equals require, go up one directory into the DB folder and grab our queries. And then here, we're going to do, let's use async await because it's fun. So let's say dogs equals await queries.getAll. And then we'll do res.json with the dogs. Did I spell that wrong? Oh, this needs to be an async function. Unexpected token. What? I don't believe you. Let's see what happens. It says it's running. It's working. So now when I request that route, goes to the database, grabs all the rows, returns it as JSON. And for the curious, so that's the async await version. The way we usually do it is say get all, then we should get back the dogs, and inside of the then we would do res.json with the dogs. So this is the promise version, and then this is the async await version, which is pretty cool. All right, finally we have our database returning some data. Let's go back to React. Cool. So homepage lists all the dogs. So now in my React app, Typically what I like to do is create a separate file with all of my API requests. You could just directly throw a fetch with a URL in your component, but if you extract it out to a separate file, then it's reusable in other components if you need to do that. So in my source directory, I'm just going to create a new folder. Let's call it lib for library. And inside of that folder, I'm going to create a file called api.js. And this is just going to export an object that has some methods on it that call the API. So first, I need the API URL. And right now, that's just http://localhost 3000/API/v1/dogs. And then this is just going to export an object that has like a get all method on it. And this is just going to return fetch with the API URL. Let's use async await. And then we will await response.json. I'm not sure how this works with function definition. Yeah? Maybe this will work. Let's see. So now, in my app.js, let's create, well, I'm not going to create a separate component. I'm just going to list the dogs right here. We are running low on time. So let's import the API from the lib folder and then the API file. And my constructor here will call super and then set the state to be to have dogs on it, which is just an empty array. And then in component did mount is where we'll make the API request. And in here, I'll say, let's say dogs are await API.getAll. And then I'll say this.set state with dogs. Cool. For now, let's just log the dogs to make sure that API request is working. And here is where we have our local things talking to each other. So I'm going to go back up into the client folder and do an npm start. Does this try to run on port 3000?
Yeah.
Yeah, so our Node app is not smart enough to choose another port, so I would start that up first. And then this is asking me, do I want to use another port? Yes. And it chose 3001. So now locally, I have my, I'll fix that. I have my API running on port 3000 and then my backend running on port 3001. Because I have await, I need to mark component did mount as async. Hey, okay, look at the DevTools. Did I mean class name? Yes, I did. No access control allow origin is present on the requested resource. Okay, so back to our server side, we need to add cores. Cores! So let's install cores. And then now in our server side code, in our app.js, let's bring in cores. And we'll use that here. It is very important that you put it at least above any route that you want to have cores on it. Typically in an Express app, this is all of your middleware, so I'd put it there anyways. But any route after this is going to have that access control allow origin header on it. So we did that. Now we refresh, and we get back undefined. And that's on our client side, and that is saying that this is not returning that. I do believe I need to return this. Yeah, there they are. Got us some doggies on the front end. Now let's show them. On Bootstrap, they have a card component. Yeah, so I want to do this. Show the dog image, card title, description, and then maybe like the tagline right there. So this is the thing I want. And then in our front end code right here, we want to iterate over our dogs. So this.state.dogs.map. That's going to give us each dog. And inside of here, I want to return that. But this should be class name.
One more.
What's that?
One more. The A tag.
Oh, cool. Thank you. And then our source is going to be dog.image URL. Our title is going to be dog.name, I think. This will be dog.description. And then this will be dog.tagline. I don't know. Let's check. Image caption, that's what it is. Maybe that doesn't make sense to put in a button. Regardless, I'm going to put it in there. Okay. Here, image caption. What's this complaining about? The image needs a closing tag. And then our alt text for the image will also be the name of the dog. Cool. There we go. Got some nice cards. We also need keys on this thingy, so let's bind the key to dog.id. The other thing is I want these to show up in columns, like 3 across or something like that. So here I'll just add a section. Give it a class of row. And then we're going to repeat these things inside of that section. But then each one is going to have a column small 4. So that should be 3 across. Cool. Great. So we got that there. I realize I am running low on time, but let's talk about development and debugging on localhost. So right now, I have 2 apps running, right? I have one app, which is my backend running on port 3000, and I have my front end app running on port 3001. And they're just talking on my local machine. This is the best workflow because if I figure out that there's some bug in my backend, I don't have to fix the backend, redeploy, and then see if my front end works. So right now, everything's running locally, so I have full control of everything. I can update things as needed, and I don't have to do this song and dance of like update, redeploy, check, update, redeploy, check. Everything's local. Cool. Everything is local. Did I mention everything's local? So I cannot reiterate how much when you're working locally, everything should be talking on localhost. Now, if I want this to work in my deployed app, I need to do something special on the client side. So notice the client side in my API folder, in my API file, I hard-coded this to localhost. But what we can do is we can detect, are we running on localhost or are we running on some deployed server? And if we are, talk to Heroku instead. So we can just do that with some logic. I could use a ternary, but that might be hard to understand. Let's use a ternary. Okay, window.location.hostname is equal to localhost. So if the host name of the browser that I'm in right now is localhost, then the API URL should be this thing. Else, it should be my Heroku URL. And that's, for one, HTTPS. And then it's barkwire API better.
Yeah.
.herokuapp.com. Cool. So what this says is if the host name is localhost, then we'll make the request to that server. Otherwise, we'll make the request to this. You could also do this with an if-else statement. In that case, API URL would have to be a let because you're assigning it inside of an if-else. Regardless, this is pretty much all I need on the client side. So now when I deploy, when I visit that deployed app in the browser, it's going to make the request against Heroku instead of making the request against localhost. Let's commit our front end and deploy and see what happens. So push that up to GitHub. And then now we will deploy the front end. Oh, I did the wrong thing. But now is actually smart enough to build my React app. I don't want to do that. I need to build my app. Was anybody like cringing as I was doing that?
I just finished it for you. So.
No, but actually, now that you say that, let's do it. So let's create a script called deploy. And this will do npm run build and now. So it will build it and then we'll cd into the build folder and then run now. Yeah. Cool. So let's try that. So npm run deploy. Okay, it's running build. CDs into the build folder. You'll notice the directory, and it deployed.
Nice.
Yeah. Quick break, and then we'll see this thing.
Let's keep going, like, build, Firebase, and then, rinse, repeat.
Okay.
Seconds of your life you're wasting there.
More than that.
And so now, if we look at the deployed site, hard refresh. What? Did I spell it right? Why does it say show dogs here? I thought I got rid of that. I did. What's happening?
Did you put in the
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was like, guys, I'm not deployed yet.
URL in correctly in your API?
I did, but even then, my front end doesn't have that. Let's just
Oh, it's showing up, yeah.
yeah, let's go in the build folder and just run light server real quick to see what we get. Okay. Weird.
You need to do a hard refresh.
Possibly. Yes. I thought I tried that though. Okay, but now if this gets into like debugging the full stack. First, we loaded the page and I don't see any dogs here. What is happening? Open the DevTools. I am getting a CORS error. I haven't deployed my backend yet, right? So all that is still happening. But you'll notice that it actually did, because I'm now deployed, it made the request out to Heroku. So on the network tab, you can click to see that request, and we know that it's not hitting localhost. Now that we're deployed on the interwebs, it's trying to hit Heroku. And that is actually responding with a CORS error. So now we need to deploy our backend here. So we haven't added anything yet. Let's commit it and say sparkles add all dogs route. We'll push it up to GitHub, and then we will deploy it to Heroku. Git push Heroku master. Okay, refresh the page. It's spinning up. Will it work? There they are. Thank you so much. But in terms of debugging the full stack, like for one, check your console logs. For two, if we're starting from the front to the back, we now look at the network tab and we can see the request that goes out. We see that a GET request is going to the URL that we expect. If this were a POST request or something like that, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see the data that your client is sending, and you want to make sure that you're actually sending the right data. And then we actually see we are getting back a response. It works on the page itself. But if something didn't work for some reason, you have to trace the entire flow of things. Like start here. For one, am I making the request to the right thing? Okay, I am. That thing is returning an error. Well, why is it returning an error? For that, I would go to Heroku Logs. So here, if we do Heroku Logs -t, we can see those requests as they come in. Let's actually watch it. So -T means tail. So like if I make a request here, we see that request come in on the back end. And if I wasn't connecting to my database or some package was missing or something like that, the moment that request comes in, you would see that error in the logs and then know that you need to fix it. You would then fix it on the front end, make sure those two things work, and then deploy the back end. Cool. What else? So, yeah, I'll definitely share this code. Where are we at? This right here, I use in every single app I've ever deployed. Like when we're local, talk locally. When we're deployed, talk to that URL. Use this. Do this. What's that? Isn't it? Cool. Right. So do that in your apps. You'll build stuff faster because you don't got to deploy. And yeah, it's great. And then we quickly covered on debugging the full stack, but use all the things available to you and don't just assume that because the data is not loading on the front end, it's a front end issue. Like it could be you forgot to migrate your database, you forgot to install a package on the back end, you have some logic error in your route. So working locally will help to fix those things early, right? Because you'll catch that when you are working locally and you won't have to redeploy. But if you do happen to deploy and it's like a server issue, you could figure that out by like looking at your network tools, looking at your Heroku logs, etc. Cool. Other things. Actually, you kind of saw my adaptive design there. Let's just add something real quick to make this even more adaptive. So right now, this says when we're on small devices, take up 4 columns. I think Bootstrap has an extra small. Yeah, so this says when we're on extra small devices, take up all 12 columns. Let's actually do this. Let's say small should be 4, and then medium should be 3. And so now as the size of the page grows, more and more dogs will take up each column. Let's actually do 6 on small, and then 4 on medium. There's what?
Just so many dogs, like more and more dogs will take over.
Oh, right. Well, with 12, it actually is, so let's see it. Is my server running? Okay, so this is an extra small device. Notice it's 1 column. This is a, whoa, hard refresh. Oh, the server's not running. That's why. Or is it? Or something, it's not running. Hard refresh. Come on, oh, it's running, what? Oh, yes. Now it's running on port 3, that's one. Jeez, okay. Okay, yeah, so extra small device, 1 column, small, it'll happen. There you go. Small device, 2 columns, and medium device, 3 columns. So that's built into Bootstrap. You could also do these things with media queries. They say, like, when the screen is this size, apply this class.
Are they using grid in Bootstrap then? Because that was...
I believe so. Yeah, if you look at their layout and then grid, well, it's Flexbox based. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the interesting thing about that, this is new in Bootstrap 4, if you leave the numbers off, if you just do column small, however many things there are inside of this row div will all take up 1 column. Like because it's using Flexbox, it knows each one will take up the exact amount of space, which is pretty cool. What libraries to use? I will list them for you. Obviously, we're out of time, but unit testing for React, there is Enzyme and Jest. So Jest is your runner and assertion library, I believe, and then Enzyme is something that essentially emulates that the React component is running inside of a browser so that it can be tested. And so this is for the front end. In Vue.js, if you generate unit tests, they actually are also using Enzyme and Jest. For backend unit testing, there's a thing called it's sign-on. Oh, no, sorry. Wait for it. Super test. Yeah. So this this lets you test backend routes, and so this is super cool because basically you just import your app into the unit tests, and then you can emulate like a GET request happening against a URL, and then you can assert that the right data comes back given some request was made to that endpoint.
Would you write like unit tests for your functions and then use this for the actual like GET requests?
Yes. Yeah. So if and that I guess maybe I'm not answering your question, but it is a good point. So backend like backend API tested with supertest, but then also you might have like library functions that is like things. It's just code that you're writing that isn't necessarily hitting an API. It's like it's logic. It's doing logical things. For that, I'd probably just use Mocha and Chai because those unit testing libraries are like, I expect that when I pass this into this function, I'm going to get this back. And yes, so like this would be your full suite of tests. So like this, you're testing little individual functions. This, you're testing that when you hit a route, you're getting back the data you expect. This tests that when I render a React component, it will display the way I'm expecting it to display and have all the things I'm expecting it to have. And then your end-to-end tests are the whole app works all together.
So just to confirm, like in a larger production environment, you would do all of the above, not
Yes.
just slap this in via Cypress.
Yeah, and a lot of places do test-driven development where you actually write your tests before you write your features.
Right.
And that, for me, that's probably the only way that I will write tests, just because it forces me to create the test before I've written the thing itself. Whereas I've written the thing and I'm like, it works. Why should I test it? But that's kind of a bad attitude to have. Yeah.
Do you ever use Ava or Tape, and where do they fit in?
They're very similar to Mocha and Chai. So there's Ava. Ava is super sweet because it runs tests in parallel. So like if you're running Mocha and Chai, it runs one test at a time. If you have a huge test suite, Ava is great because you can say this test should run first or this group of tests should run together. But if you don't say anything, it will run all of your tests simultaneously. I think like up to like 5 or more at a time. And so your test suite run a lot faster. What was the other one you mentioned?
Tape.
Oh yeah, so and then Tape would just be another version of Mocha. It's just a different way of defining your tests. Some terms in here are like test runner, assertion library, mocks, maybe some other things. But typically your test runner is the command you're running from the command line to run through your test suite. Your assertion library are things like expect this to be, or assert this, or should be this. And then mocks are a way of mocking data that some function might depend on without having to test the integration of those two functions. So like, that's a topic for another time, but look up that word. Yes, sir.
So do you typically use Postman at all to test like routes and things? Or
Definitely.
you don't have enough now, right?
Yeah, so I mean, right now it was just a GET route. So for me,
Right.
the browser was good enough for that. But yeah, once I start working on CRUD routes with like post and put, I would test those routes with Postman or with supertest tests before going to implement the front end to actually.
Is that before you deploy it as well? Like,
Yeah.
Like, so that's where I guess I'm missing the whole feature idea of like deploy, but you wouldn't want to deploy into these routes until you test the Postman.
Right, and in my case, I didn't deploy until both the back end and the front end were done.
Okay.
Lists all the dogs, shows the description. We didn't link to the single page, and then we deployed. But yes, so like that's the main idea of Postman, anyways. It's like you don't have to build a full-fledged front end. You can still test your endpoints and make sure they behave the way they should, without having to implement the full front end with the form and everything to test that. All right, it's lunchtime. Any last comments, questions, thoughts?
You're gonna.
It's recorded. I got the code. Push it up. What's that?
What about your Heroku gist?
Oh yeah, I'll select that too.
Is that your-
Definitely.
If you could do the Express, like, generator one that you were talking about,
Yes.
video as well, that would be awesome.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Slack out a single wait resource. source.
Just
Yes.
Slack is
Everything,
you
my
know.
in my brain.
Yeah.
All right.
Like, for